Hey, this is Todd. I am here with James. We're going to talk about Genesis. I thought before I get underway, a couple things. So first, I want to sort of James, you're here. You're the first person that got on this bandwagon. So let me explain the concept to everyone, even potentially myself and maybe James. I had this idea where folks could come on and they might have something in the role playing game space that they are passionate about, whether it's a system, a mechanic, something, whatever. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to get some of these people who are passionate about this stuff to talk about it, kind of show why they love it so much or what they like about it, and that will help, in a sense, like the title of this, sell us on, hey, maybe we should look at Genesis or in this case, Genesis, it could be anything, but in this case, hey, maybe you've seen it on drive-thru, you've seen it in your local gaming shop, you've heard people talk about it, and you're wondering, well, what's good about this one? And you haven't had time to peruse it. This is a chance to get somebody's take on it who really loves it, as opposed to somebody who, maybe they just kind of heard of it. But, I always feel like when you get people to speak about this stuff with passion, it helps you kind of see what they love about it, and maybe you'll find something about it. So that is the concept. James, why don't you intro yourself? I know that we connected through, the Audio Dungeon Discord, but why don't you tell folks, what you do in the RPG space and all that good stuff?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on. So yeah, I do a couple things. I have an Anchor podcast that I do that is a solo actual play. So yeah, basically I get on there. I go play through various systems, playing through the same kind of story, and just playing by myself. So showing how to go through. Sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of an echo on my side. So I'm trying to just power through it.
Yeah, no problem. I don't hear it on my end, but I'm not sure, folks, if anyone's in the chat. Oh, Brian says he hears an echo. Cool. Well, just power through it, and we'll go on as best we can.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so really, it's a solo actual play. It really picks up, I think, in the one-shots between Season 1 and Season 2 as I'm figuring out what to do in Season 1. One of the surprising pieces of feedback is going through different systems and showing the same story but using different systems. So Genesis is actually one of them that I used for a couple episodes. Used everything from OSR stuff to 5e. So it's all improv right at the desk. I don't really prepare beforehand. So it's just a different thing I got into as I was starting to play RPGs a couple years ago because during the pandemic.
Right. So for sure. That sounds really cool. Do you use any specific what's the one, like GM emulators to help you out that are outside specific systems? Like Mythic, I think, is the one that I'm most familiar with.
Yep. So I've used a couple. So I've used Mythic several times. I've used Motif, which has kind of a different take on it. I have the printed out version of Rayodis's Oracle.
Nice.
Which is also fantastic. Used OSR solo as well. Which is 5 parts per million. He makes a bunch of different kinds of D6 or 2. And so I've showed how to do that, and then also how to
I'm not familiar with that one. I'll have to check it out.
It's good. Yeah, it's a good one. He makes it basically for each system. So I've got one for Traveler as well. So it uses the 2d6. Make a bespoke sort of oracle.
Awesome. Now, I noticed you sent me, I haven't had a chance to look at it, but you sent me an itch storefront. What kind of stuff are you working on yourself?
Yeah. So on itch, I've got everything from small little adventures, mostly free. The first project I did was Nova's Nebulae, which is a small sci-fi rule set. So it's supposed to be Traveler sort of for one-shots. More lightweight. Really Firefly the game.
Oh, cool. I never got to play the actual Firefly the game RPG, but it's I don't know much about it as an RPG, but I always liked the show, and it seemed like a really cool setting to get into. Space cowboys and all that.
It's worked out well. It's quick enough to pick up that I've played with coworkers at lunch or various things like that. It's very small. It's just a couple pages. And it's free. So
awesome. So everyone check that out. Links are in the show description for all that good stuff. I definitely have to check out the solo actual plays. 'Cause I always see people posting stuff, doing kind of solo plays, but I'm always curious about the end narratives seem great, but I think being able to see it kind of as the playing through, there's some value there because I've confessed to have been a little bit like I'm not sure how you got from wherever you started to this finished narrative that you have. I mean, it looks great, but how do you actually do it? So it seems like being able to watch or listen to someone go through it, you'll kind of get some of that step-by-step help, especially if something that interests you. And yeah, with the pandemic, always great to be able to do stuff yourself when you can. But I guess without further ado, so let's get into Genesys now. You can correct me, and I might be misthinking. Is Genesys the system that was first, the one that's newer Star Wars, like Edge of Empire? Was that kind of the first system, and that kind of became Genesys? Do I have that right, or am I thinking of a different?
Yeah, that's actually right. So I've actually got the book here with me. So Edge of the Empire, the Age of the Rebellion, Force and Destiny, I think is the sort of Jedi one. So they made that first, and then they extracted Genesys from it.
I see. So I know that the Star Wars version had kind of a lot of sort of funny dice, or just very, I guess, unique, specific dice to that game. Does that carry over into Genesys, the generic version? Do they? Yeah,
they're actually the same. So I just have the Star Wars dice, not the Genesys dice. The difference is they changed some of the symbols on them. So some of them are too close to Star Wars IP. I don't know how focused that is, but looks too close to be the Star Wars IP for that. And then one of the other symbols is definitely LucasArts IP. So they just changed some of the symbols to be more generic looking. But other than that, they're exactly the same.
All right. So what got you into? Did you ever? So you have the books. What was your intro into Genesys? Did you come via one of those Star Wars games, or how that?
Yeah, actually. So the first RPG I really played, I got to play a one shot once of 5e that a friend hosted. I didn't really get it yet. The first game I ran and started to play was the beginner set. So they made a beginner set box, sort of a stripped down version of the rules, comes with an adventure in it, and all kinds of stuff. And it's really good. You actually could just play the beginner version of the game and just keep rolling with it if you wanted. So I ran that. That's mostly experience with Genesys. I actually haven't played a ton of Genesys, which is one of the reasons why I want to sell you on it, so more people can play it. So I can play Genesys. So more people can play it. So I can play Genesys.
Absolutely. So having so I guess just get into it. So what are the or maybe if you can, like what? I mean, obviously we don't need to get into kind of like what is a role playing game, all that kind of stuff. But what are these sort of I don't know, unique or things to Genesys? Like what sets Genesys apart in terms of, or maybe how would you, if you're in the gaming store and somebody was looking for an RPG, how would you set Genesys apart from all the other RPGs on the shelves? What's its?
Yeah, for me, even though like kind of what was just addressed, the proprietary dice can make things difficult. I think for people, I think they're the best and worst part of Genesys. So if you're okay with using different dice, I think that they're really cool because for me the best thing about Genesys is one of them is that it shows that there's a false dichotomy between narrative and quote unquote traditional games or tactical games maybe. So it's simply that you have a spectrum from Fate to Pathfinder, and they're at opposite. You can do both. And so one of the ways that Genesys does that with dice is that you have different axes going on for whether or not you succeed or fail. How well you do that. So advantage or disadvantage, other things on, and then you can also get triumph and despair. And we can maybe get into the nitty-gritty of it a bit. But basically, you get narrative aspects. So you never just have really just or you almost never have I just failed. I swung my sword and I failed. Or even just I swung my sword and hit person, but that's it. So you optionally have more depth to what's going on. To specifically make it more cinematic. So it's not as much simulationist per se, but it's really trying to emulate cinema. And all those fight scenes or all those combat, whatever you want, there's layers of what's going on.
Let's run through an example.
Never just fail. It's never just pass fail.
Gotcha. Really. So how would that work? So you would have, I guess, ranks and some kind of skill. Oops, Terrence is saying so Terrence is saying it's bad. So maybe this, all right, maybe the echo is worse than I thought. I'm not hearing an echo at all on my end of things, but apparently the chat is hearing it. Do you want to try to exit and come back in and see if that fixes it?
I can do
everything
that.
from my end sounds fine. But
I can do that.
All right, let's try it. So hold on, folks. All right. Sorry about the echoes. Am I echoing, Terrence? If you're still in the chat, am I echoing here? I don't hear it. I don't hear anything myself. But if it's bad for you, then it's bad. It's only coming from James. Okay. Well, let's see. He's rejoining, so let's see. All right. James, say something and we can determine if you were still echoing or not.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
How is it? Nothing, Terrence.
Let me fully leave and come back and I'll see. All
right. So sorry about that, folks. Nope, it was he left it. It was fixed. All right, I'm bringing him back. Apparently, it was fixed before you left this past time.
Oh, okay, great.
All right, so hopefully it's good. All right, so I'm not sure how much was rendered incoherent by the echo, but let's go with an example. So you're talking about we can mix kind of you can sort of narrative stuff. It's not just about pass fail. There's some nuance there and things we can build off of. It might be best if you can, or maybe if we can run through kind of example. I'm not sure how skills or challenges work, but so we don't have to get like super granular, but just we're rolling, however you want to do it. We're rolling X amount of dice and sort of what we get with those dice. What does that turn out? What does that go from in the mechanical part of it into sort of the fictional part?
Yeah. So the stats are fairly basic because it has to do with building up a dice pool. So you usually have 5 main stats. They're somewhat analogous to stats in other games. But it has to do with building up your dice pool. So you've got different kinds, and they're opposed. So you're kind of rolling for how difficult something is, and also your skill for it. So let's say that you're doing something physical. You might use brawn. Your brawn skill is like your strength skill, and it's going to be between 1 and 5. So you've got like these green dice, D8s, and so if you have maybe a brawn skill of 2, then by default you're going to roll 2 of these green dice against however many difficulty dice. Let's see.
Oh my gosh, echo's back. Sounds like.
Let me try it. Maybe it doesn't like Firefox. Let me see if I try different.
All right, we're gonna try a browser switch. I'll hold down the fort.
All right,
until you get back. All right, so James is gonna switch out browsers. Oh boy, so much for the first episode of something new going smoothly. Well, when does anything go smoothly on this channel? Never. And it's Monday. It's all kinds of bad stuff. And I'm getting hot. I got to crack the window open here a second. It's freezing outside and I'm hot. Sweating it up. The pressures. I got a mic in my speaker. I do not have a mic in my speaker. Is there such a thing as a mic in a speaker? I'm not even sure what that would... Or a mic in my speaker, a speaker in my mic? I'm not echoing, right? Just want to clarify. All right, here he comes back again. All right. Let's try this again. All right, say something and let...
Yeah, hopefully the echo's fixed.
All right. Yes, chat, let us know the echo's fixed. Hey, Marcelo. All right, so let's try. I'll just wait to hear comments as far as the echo goes, but let's go back to your example. Sorry for all the interruptions. Sure. I know it's hard to get up a groove to talk about something. Things keep going wrong.
It's all good. Yeah, it's really so you have your basic stats, and they affect how many of the basic skill dice you get, and then your skills sort of upgrade at a certain number of those. So if you're fighting and you have a skill in that, you have a brawn of 2, but you're trained, you upgrade 1 to the sort of a D12.
Keep going. I'm checking with the chat.
Sure. Yeah. So it just increases your your chances of getting successes. There's more chance of getting successes and advantages, and then sort of triumph, which is your ability to do something really awesome.
Still isn't fixed. Still echoing. I'm not sure what to do, guys.
Let's see.
I don't know. Do you want to try rebooting? Would it be onerous?
No, that's no problem. I can do that.
All right. I'm just gonna drop that out. All right, so he's gonna try to reboot. I don't know what's going on. So it just figures. It just figures. He's gonna try to reboot and come back. I hope we can actually get. Thankfully, we only will have wasted less than 20 minutes of everybody's time as we try to figure this out, because I do really want to hear about Genesys, and I can hear about it. Okay, I don't know what's happening, because it's weird that I think I can hear him fine, but somewhere in the tunnels, it's getting echoey. If this doesn't fix it, I'm not sure how to fix it. And then it says, good time to tell the chat about the forum. Yes, actually, that is a grand idea. I have a forum now. I'm gonna see. Actually, I should probably I restarted all my browsers, so I don't have the link handy. Not that it's difficult. Oh, where we are going. Here we go. All right, so here's the new forum. I'll put that on the chat. The idea behind the forums is, so just as I'm spinning my wheels waiting for James to come back, the idea behind the forums is I just want to have this one centralized place. Hopefully folks can come and we could talk about different things, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on my podcast, whether I'm going to be trying to do some more stuff with making stuff of my own. I'm way behind. I'm trying to finish up at least the bulk of the content work on my Kickstarted zine that I'm way behind on, trying to do that stuff. And I want to have one kind of place where I can say, okay, here's where we can go and talk about it. And hopefully maybe have a place where other folks can come together and ask each other about stuff, ask me about stuff. The community channel on YouTube is okay, but there's not a lot to it, right? It doesn't have a lot of complexity. You can't even link to it directly, which is kind of a frustrating thing. I can't even just say, here's a link to the community tab on the channel. I can just link to the channel and then link and say, hey, go to the community tab, or I can't link to a specific post. So anyway, the forum is a good way to come around. But James is back. Let's see. All right, James, let's see what we're...
With any luck, third time's the charm.
Gotta be, right? Got to be. Marcello, nothing. Somebody in the chat, let us know if echoes still persist. Because if not, maybe I'll just have to just record this and then... Because like I said, for me, it's okay. And I'll have to listen back to the restream, like their raw video. But I hear you just fine without any echoes at all. But something somewhere is...
I could hear it on my end, so I didn't know if it had just been me.
Oh, okay.
I don't hear it now, at least not as bad. But I don't know if it seems like if it grew over time or what.
Someone was saying it did. I can't hear it at all, so I'm just relying on everyone else's ears to tell me. All right, so we were gonna do. Yes. You're talking about bronze. So one thing I wanted to ask you about the dice. Mm-hmm. What is the distribution of success, fails, and stuff on each of those dice? Is it like, how does it work? Is it like 2 fails, 2 success, 2 crits, or whatever?
Well, yeah, they have a bunch of different. So they're all kind of different, and they have different amounts. So, okay. Good. It looks like it's saying it's at least lower. So hopefully it doesn't build up the steam it did before for the echo.
I'll just have to keep interrupting you. To stop.
Yes, exactly. That's the problem. Is I have to cause it to see if it's happening. Which is great. But yeah, so different dice are positive and or negative. So like they're usually opposed. So they only are one axis because you typically roll them at the same time.
Okay.
So your skills are only going to have sort of positives or blanks at various levels. Your negative dice is the opposite. It's really the same distribution, but you've got negatives then. So you've got positive, negative symbols, blanks. The distribution is the same. So really every sort of denomination is like that. The sort of advantage, back, what they call dice.
Gotcha. And so it'll be situational when you have to add one of those negative dice onto your roll. So if you're rolling
exactly.
So if you're making that brawn check,
right?
If you want to go back to that, how would that work?
Yeah. So let's just say you have a brawn of 3. So you take 3 of sort of your attribute dice. You have a skill of 1 in maybe fighting. So then you upgrade one of them. Let's see if I can get on the camera. One of them to be the D12 instead of the D8.
Oh,
and you would roll against the difficulty. So if it's an average difficulty, you might take 2 of the difficulty dice, and there's kind of a spectrum. But yeah, so you're rolling against that. Sometimes if you're rolling against an enemy, you would roll against their exact skill. So you know their stats are 2 brawn or 3 brawn rather than 1 skill. Against yours would be the same as yours, but opposite.
Gotcha. All right, so I'm checking with the chattings. Apparently, Echo is still here. I don't have an onboard mic on that I'm aware of. Do you have two? Do you know if you have? I mean, because you run a podcast, so you record. But I don't know. Do you have potentially 2 mics?
I do have 2 mics. It should only have the one on, specifically pointing at my blue mic. I can try to see. There's an echo cancellation, and noise. Maybe those are causing part of it. I also work in tech and programming, and I wish that technology worked more.
I wish everything worked more.
Yes, for sure. Let's see.
Yeah, but so we I don't think it's anything on my end because it's not happening when I'm talking, but I don't know. I mean, my these headphones have open back, so there's potential for a little bit of sound leakage, but I think it's pretty low, and I've done a lot of these with these headphones on, and I've never had really echoes happening before, so I don't think there's enough sound leakage that it's coming back around.
Yeah,
back around from my headphones.
It could be more of a signal thing. I have open back headphones as well, but they shouldn't be picked up by the microphone.
Yeah, I am not sure, folks.
It's just all the gremlins. You know what it is? You know what it is? It's like the TTRPG Titans are trying to stop the spread of Genesys.
I know, right? This is the Force. So there's a negative aspect into the Force. I'm not sure what else we do unless we have somebody we have an audio engineer in the chat who can diagnose. So let's see if we go into settings. Let's see. Let's check it. This is gonna be a fun stream of checking out. All right, so your audio, if you go into settings, your audio, you have your audio input, it just make sure it's set to what it's supposed to be set to, in terms of restream, in terms of the chat.
Yeah, so it's on my blue microphone, and the output is set to just my speakers, which is my...
Now, restream, I think, should have like an echo cancellation. You could try turning that on.
Yeah, that was on by default.
It was on by default.
It's gotten any better, I just turned it off recently.
Okay.
Because I know sometimes Discord's, the noise suppression causes the noise.
Yeah, I actually used to run with it on, and I realized I was better off running without it. All right, well, let's just go. So
sure.
Someone says it's listenable. Hopefully, so if this is unlistenable from a streaming perspective, maybe the restream one that I could pull down afterwards will be good, and then I will post that link up. Or if it is listenable, then hey, listen along. But we're gonna plow ahead. Brian Smith says output from James' side is going to his headphones or speaker. I believe it's going to his headphones, Brian. I believe. James, you correct me, right? It is going to it. Yeah. So
it says it says speakers on my side, but it's really just the
headphones.
The input. I can change it to communications. Let's see.
Yeah. Let's see. If James has multiple mics, can he unplug all but the onboard mic, even if it's low quality? That's up to you, James.
I can certainly try if you'd like. The onboard mic is essentially unusable. It usually causes. It sounds like I'm in a hurricane.
Well, why don't we try it for a sec, just to see? Just to see. We'll do. This is turning into a sell me on audio engineering for streams for 100. All right. We're gonna try this nothing. So stick around and
let me bring it up.
And now he's gone dead. That was the end of James. Thanks to nothing, you've killed him. You've killed them all.
Brought the laptop up to see if the default microphone is useful at all.
All right. Actually, you sound okay to me. I mean, I get some room noise, but that's no biggie. Say something else, and we'll let chat
Sure,
chime in and see if it's any better for them.
All right. Yeah. So that's the default microphone. I don't know how usable that is. Hopefully there's something.
To me, you sound good, but chat, you guys are listening to the stream. I think I must be listening to kind of the pre, whatever, I don't know, muxed or whatever it is that they do to it. Still echo.
Yeah, I just unplugged the other microphone. The only other one is there's an echo, or there's a microphone in the camera. So I can try to use that one. There we go. That's it to the cameras. That seems worse.
All seems the same to me, really. I don't know what Restream's doing over here. Yay! See, now nothing says the on the bright side. The audio quality onboard mic is okay. It is all right.
Well, there we go.
Maybe we need holy water or fire. Could be. All right, folks. I guess we're gonna go with what we've got. Hopefully, I can retrieve some the file later, because like I said, for wherever it's getting to Restream Central, I hear no echo at all or anything.
Apologies. I actually have I have never had such an echo on Discord or anything else. I have once when I used OBS, and I think it's just because I'm incapable of using OBS.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, I have OBS and I enjoy it, but I really like this Restream just because it's so easy. I can send people a link. Yeah. It's not hard to get set up. Everything's browser-based. I do know that it being browser-based does introduce some issues because whatever, memory and stuff, it's not a full application. But 99.9% of the time it works. We might be in that 0.1% where something strange has happened. All right, we're going to keep going. Sorry, folks, for the continual interruptions due to echoing. We are aware of it. We're just going to keep going ahead, and hopefully I can get something out of it. And then if it is totally unusable, then hopefully James can come back. We one of the reasons we squeeze this in is because James's wife is about to give birth, potentially at the end of this week. So it was either now or in a couple of months. So we're trying for now, but if it doesn't work, I will revisit with James in a couple of months, and we'll do this again. So, all right. So we got different dice. Let me see if I can recap this if I'm learning Genesys correctly. I've got some kind of attribute. I've got some kind of skill that's going to give me some dice. And then depending on the difficulty, that's going to add in some of the negative dice. All right. So we got kind of your sort of skill dice, some negative dice, and then we could potentially have an advantage or disadvantage die or dice. Do they stack advantage, disadvantage? Could you have like multiple advantage dice, whatever Genesys calls them?
Yeah, exactly. So you've got sort of like your attribute dice, the upgraded attribute dice. Similarly, you have the normal difficulty dice, upgraded difficulty, and then on top of that, you have these are sort of the I forget what they call them, the boost die and the setback die. There's different reasons why they come up, but you can get multiple ones.
And can you have them both? Can you have like mixed, like, oh, I've got one thing and one setback, we're going to roll it all together?
Yeah, so a good example would be like if you're shooting at somebody who has armor, that would give you a setback die to actually damage them. But maybe you took the time to aim, that gives you a boost. So they can still be opposed. So the difficulty is completely separate axis from the skill or advantages.
Nice. So when it seems like you get some pretty massive dice pools going, I suppose you'd have to have a lot of stuff going on. How many dice are you? I guess if you had to average out in your sort of normal situational things and sessions in Genesys, how many dice are you chucking at once here, given all these different things that are happening?
Probably between 6 and 9, depending on the situation.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now, I like physical dice, and it does take a little bit getting used to, because the real trick and why you're either going to love the dice mechanic or you're going to hate it is that the symbols cancel each other out. So you end up taking a net result. So
all right, so let's keep going with our example. So we had brawn of, what was it? What did we say it was? Brawn of 2, brawn of 3, skill of 1.
Yep. Yeah, so you roll against sort of a difficulty. You look for any advantage symbols, and they cancel out any threat symbols. And you look for any successes, and they cancel out failures.
And then whichever you have more of at the end of it all. So let's say, so I know you're talking about kind of, it's not just pass fail, it's a bunch of things. So I'm just going to throw out some random results. So if we had, now, once things have canceled out, are you still counting them in when you're creating the the narrative of what happened, or are they literally off the board? So if we end up with, say, one net success, are we still looking at all those other things that happened? They all canceled out, or are we just concerned about the one success?
In most cases, it's just the net result. There's one exception I'll come to, but yeah. So let's say you roll. You've got 4 advantages and 3 threats. That means the net result is 1 advantage. So that's what matters for the result. And then same with successes and failures.
So what happens if you end up with, I don't know, 1 advantage, one success as the outcomes? You roll that dice and
yeah. So success failure is exactly what it sounds like. Did you do the thing you meant to do or not? Advantage is really anything separate from that. So there's a bunch of ways you can spend advantage. There's mechanical ways to okay, I got 3 advantage. I'm gonna have a skill that lets me use that to do something else. You can always just narrate what makes it well. So maybe in this example, you're swinging your sword, you have an advantage. Maybe you say you also notice this other thing happening on the right, or you're able to push them back, make them off kilter a little bit, so that you could maybe say you'll have a setback.
Okay, so if you get advantage, it does it always, or I guess usually, if possible, translate into some kind of mechanical, either a mechanical hook for another ability. So I could be, I don't know, the Space Samurai, and when I score an advantage on my laser sword attacks, I get to do something else. Right, that could be one way it plays out, or it could be, okay, well, I don't have something like that, but when I hit him with my laser sword, I have advantage. I can shove him back 5 feet, or like you said, give him a setback on their next action.
Yeah, there are mechanical ways to spend, but you can always do narrative as well. And I think the big thing that people love or hate. I think there's sometimes people feel like you have to always use all of the advantages or disadvantages. And the thing is, like, if you don't have a mechanical thing and it doesn't, and you can't think of something narrative, then you can just kind of move on because it's there for extra flavor and what you want, but it's not.
I mean, I can see the impulse, because it's like, I have this thing, like, hey, you have this bonus if you can find a place to use it. Like, boy, I want to try to use it. Like, I would feel bad every time there's one of these came up and I couldn't find a way to turn it into something, real, because then it just feels like a little bit of a waste. So what are the big, to you, the strengths of this kind of all these dice going on here? Because it seems like, on the one hand, you definitely have a lot more possibilities than you would say a straight up D20, but it does take a longer amount of time to parse those dice. So what about it do you really think is the strongest part of it, the part that you feel like when you're not playing with something like this you miss?
Yeah. So it's it's not going to have the same speed of another game where you're throwing one die or a couple dice, but it's just the richness of the rolls. I think if you're rolling for everything all the time, this game would get too cumbersome. But if you're really only rolling when things have the interesting chance of failure, then that's where it really shines, because even when you fail, you can fail forward. Or you can fail really badly, or you can succeed but have disadvantage. So when you're trying to emulate more cinematic fiction, it adds this extra dimension of what's going on. So yeah, you're able to hit them, you're able to damage, but while you do that, you sort of you can fail really bad on like sword, or you open yourself like you overextend, and maybe you open yourself up to somebody else's attack. Or it's also for social skills. So maybe you are able to persuade a person to do something, but in doing so, somebody else observing it, they dislike that. So there's always something going on, and it's rarely I just succeed or I just fail. So it's almost like when you're playing solo, when you want to have more like what's the concrete. Sorry, the echo does come by my side, so it affects my brain. But yeah, so it's just richness of results. So it's not speed of results, but it's richness of results. So one roll gets you farther than one roll in another system.
Gotcha. One of the things that here's what I was going to say. So does the system really encourage you? Because, you see that kind of advice comes up, roll only when it's important, whatever. But a lot of systems don't explicitly say, hey, only do this when this is important, right? Like, don't, like D&D a lot of people will say, look, don't have people roll for everything, but the rules don't necessarily do a great job of communicating. Don't do that. So in Genesis, did they, I mean, did they have that kind of clear guidance for GMs and I guess players alike that, hey, like use the dice, right, for like, the bigger moments and let the other stuff, which I think would fit in with that kind of cinematic thing where you want to kind of let things play out as long as possible before you have to get to a die roll. But do they make that kind of explicit guidance, or how do they handle that when they're talking about, or your experience of learning it from the books? How do they handle it?
Yeah, my experience just from learning it from the books is it is mainly just when it's interesting. I think that, for instance, the adventure that comes with the beginner Star Wars game is like that. So it's not for everything perception all the time. But I think it's hard to know exactly just when I go through and look things, because everything I've read before also factors into how I think about things. So for me, that's very much a thing I picked up from playing, Powered by the Apocalypse, Dungeon World, Monster of the Week, and so I can't remember how much they stressed that or not, but it's something. It's just the way that I've taken it. I do believe that except in circumstances, if it's really only if something there's a light chance for if there's a chance for failure or something interesting, because there are checks where you can say, this is a near thing, like you should definitely be able to do this. There's maybe not even any difficulty, but it's you can still roll for it, and that lets you, it lets you still have the you did it, but you get also this advantage. So you can even roll when you're not going to fail, but you want something spectacular to happen, or you want to move the meta narrative. So it is kind of loosey-goosey like that when you're not specifically in combat or, a structured environment, ship combat, anything like that. So I think that part is kind of hard. I think you roll more than a lot of other narrative games, but I do think they're trying to push. I think really Genesys is made for people who are used to, tactical games, especially newer, more modern games, 5e, Pathfinder, things like that, and saying, hey, you can have that. You can have all the crunch and all of the subsystems that you want, but you can still have narrative play. And to be fair, I don't think that you need to play Genesys to get that. I just think that the dice mechanic really lends itself to that kind of play.
I mean, it seems really cool, and I like it a lot. I mean, I kind of I think dice pools are really, honestly, they're underrated because a lot of games use dice pools, but I think they're really handy for a lot of stuff. And I think even though I find the same a little bit of frustration with something like DCC when they have their own dice, as cool as they are, at the same time, it's like, well, DCC is probably, I don't know if it's the same or worse, because it's not even just special symbols on the dice, but it's kind of like a D30 and
right.
You can't. I know there are ways to substitute some other dice for a D30, but it's not natural to me. I wouldn't even know how to do it. But that you can get a lot of different flavors, and I think I've been looking at recently some mechanics with playing cards that are really cool, because you didn't just have the number. You could talk about the number as one thing, and of course you have ace through whatever. Then you've also got the color. So you have red and black. And so that's another thing you can flip on. And then you have the suits on top of it. So you have all these things with one card can give you a bunch of stuff. In this case, you can have all these different dice and have all these different things and how they work together. I think the big, at least trick for me, and of course with the playing group, is like someone said, I think it was Terrence at the beginning of this thing, said like, hey, custom dice can be tough. I mean, now with stuff like Roll20, I don't know how tough is it. I feel like all these systems have built-in support, but yeah, it can be hard if you're trying to go. And it seems like I think this came up with DCC too, but that, it seems like you have to have, I don't know how much of these dice they sell, but when you have to you're rolling from 6 to 8 dice, I hope they sell you that amount of dice. Not that you're going to be rolling 6 to 8 dice, but they only sell you 4. And so now it's like, well, how many sets of these dice do I have to buy to actually get the whole, experience? But it does give you a lot of nuance, which is really cool. Do they what was I gonna say? I know that I don't know. I know in the Star Wars one, they split up stuff, right? So the first book was all about like a bounty hunter kind of Han Solo kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then they had the Force stuff in another book. Do they add anything? Do they just use the symbology? Or does it just use different aspects of things? I guess I would say things mean different things depending on if you're playing like a Force user versus a non-Force user, or are you still it's just all about the interpretation, or does it have specific different mechanical hooks?
Yeah, so different games will have different mechanics. To be honest, for Star Wars, I've only ever played Edge of the Empire, so I don't know
Okay.
what's different in the others. I do know that it's mainly like you're still going to be using the same kinds of mechanics, but you're going to have different paths. So it's a skill based game, for example. So you do have your stats, and like we said, that factors into how many dice you're rolling in general. But you also have traits and skill trees. So you don't have levels in Genesys. You get experience points, and you spend experience on upgrading skills or traits. Traits are kind of like feats. I suppose they're more like that, but they usually have a tree. So Star Wars, for instance, has a tree of skills. Like you have to have it's literally laid out as a tree, so it's easy to follow. But you have to have this skill, and then that lets you get this other skill. Genesys itself doesn't necessarily have to be that way. When you get just like the Genesis book, so the Force Destiny adds a lot of that stuff to like a specific Force users. Here's user skills and traits and so on.
Cool. All right. We had a question in the chat. Now that people can hear us both clearly. So nothing says, they never played a dice pool game. How does a player or GM know the approximate chance of success? And if you don't know, how do you decide what to do without knowing the odds? So basically, and maybe this has come up, I'm sure this must have come up when you're running your solo game in Genesys. And certainly I think I don't know if you're just doing something that's not in the particular module or venture, but how do you, or what tools do they give you, or how do you determine difficulties of things? Because that is difficult. I mean, it's one thing if you have any dice open, anydice.com, you can go there and you can open up and if you understand how to write it, you can figure out all that stuff. But do they give you tools? Do they just say this many dice for these kind of difficulties? What kind of tools do they give you to measure all that stuff?
Yeah, so it goes for narrative. So as far as the odds, I don't actually know the odds, which I think is great for Edge of the Empire because, Han Solo says, never tell me the odds. But so they do tell you, so for a skill check in general, I actually have it written down somewhere on a card, but it's in the GM screen and everything too. But maybe 2 difficulty dice, that's an average check. 3 would be hard, 4 would be extremely hard, and 5 would be impossible, right? So they kind of use words like that, like easy, medium, hard, impossible. So they want you, I think they're trying to obscure the odds specifically for that. So that's something that some people are going to like and some people aren't going to like. It's kind of like Fate in that way. You can look up Fate and it's all D6s, and so you can see the bell curve. You could figure it out on here, but it would be hard because the dice are normal dice in the sense that they're D12s, D8s, D6s, but the symbols sometimes a certain face has no symbols, or sometimes it has 2 of them, and so you have to count them all up.
And there's also, right, you mentioned the player sided stuff too, so that you might have figured out what the odds are for, say, those D8s, but then somebody says, aha, I have this thing that turns those D8s into D12s, and then that kind of throws whatever odds you come out with out the window. So how do they have you do it? Do they have you say just if something's like, what is a good, like, if you're going to say this is easy or hard, what would you? Yeah, is that like? So 3,
I personally,
5, 7?
when I've run it, I'll tell them. And I'll usually just say both. So you can try that. It's going to be probably pretty hard, which means you'd roll 3 of these or something like that. So I usually like to say both, so you can see it. Some people are fine with just hearing, oh yeah, it's hard or it's difficult. But if you say you're going to be rolling against 3 of these difficulty dice, then they kind of have an idea. The other time where it's upgraded is usually because you're doing an opposed check against somebody else's skill. And so anything else, you may not know what their skill is, and that's part of maybe you want to know more about this guy before you just start to try to to beat him up. There's kind of an exception. Different games have different ways of doing it. So Star Wars has an extra system that other Genesis games don't necessarily have. There's one that was brought up in the chat. Another one is the Fate, the light side and dark side points. So even in the Edge of the Empire, even though you don't typically have Jedi, there's sort of a meta currency of the light side and dark side points, and you can spend those to upgrade a die. And so if I spend a light side point as a player to upgrade one of my dice, it now becomes a dark side point and kind of goes back and forth. So that's similar in a way to like fate points in Fate or something like that. The other one was the obligation, duty, morality. I think the big thing that brings up is that one of the things that is different with Genesys with Star Wars versus other games is that, and it's one of the criticisms that some people don't like about Genesys. It's one of the things I like about it. particularly is that some people are like, well, the Genesys core rulebook is not really a game; it's a toolkit to make a game. And sometimes the criticism is a toolkit to make a toolkit. I personally like that because I don't really have the patience to read a ton of source material. So that's why I've never run GURPS, not to throw any shade there. I'm sure it's a great game. But I just don't, I'm not going to read all of that and grab all of these things. I'm sometimes just, I want to take a small core of things, grab a few numbers, a few ideas, and then just roll with it.
So for Genesys itself, it has no implied setting. It's not trying to give you. It's just literally just giving you, here are the rules.
And actually on it, this like the role-playing game for all settings, they do make setting books. So I think that they've got, and they have suggestions in here. So they're not fully fleshed out, but like, here's an example of how you would make an orc or an elf for a fantasy setting, or there's sort of a steampunk setting of like zeppelins and, you know, zeppelins and stuff like that. There's like, okay, if you want to run a sci-fi game, you know, that's hard sci-fi, here's maybe some stats on some starting stats or things like that, some item examples. So they come with examples. So it's not that they don't give you anything. It's just not, here's all of the items you could have in the game, you know. And so if you're into tier lists,
I think depending, I mean, it's kind of cool. I could see enjoying that, because at a certain point, if you've been in the hobby long enough, you have all the settings you probably ever going to want and need, and you're probably going to make your own setting. So if you have something that's really going to help you just with the mechanics, right, of helping you figure out how you want to mechanically set stuff up, that is kind of, I mean, granted, it's not as friendly, because if someone showed up my doorstep, hey, let's game, and you pull out Genesys, it's like, well, I got to create all the stuff to go with it. Maybe that doesn't work that well. But you know, if you're going to go and create your whole campaign and do everything anyway, it seems like having here is this really good framework that you like.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they do sell source books. So like if you know, they do have some of their own settings. So Star Wars, obviously, like they've got Star Wars stuff. They've got a sci-fi one, I think, called Android. They've got you know, the Foundry, which is like, you know, where people can make third-party stuff, kind of like, I guess, with 5e stuff like that.
Is it now? Terrence is saying that the publisher, they heard the publisher shutting Genesys down. I did see on Drive-Thru, it was it Fantasy Flight? Mm-hmm. Who did, and it's not Fantasy Flight anymore, something like Edge. So maybe they did transfer it to another company, because I did notice that when I pulled up the Drive-Thru link. Yeah. I was expecting like Fantasy Flight Games, I think, is who did the Star Wars stuff, and that's what my expectation was for Genesys, but it wasn't them. But it's still out there, Terrence, so it's still
it is. There was some speculation before about if it was getting shut down. I think what happened is that Fantasy Flight, the Fantasy Flight brand, I think as a name brand, is now focusing more on tabletop board games and things like that. So it's still actually the same company, I believe. They just moved all the RPG stuff to Edge Studios.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's all still there. As far as the support, sorry, my dog is like dreaming.
No, hey, after all the echo problems, a little dog bark here and there is.
That's right. So I think it is still supported. It hasn't been dropped necessarily. But yeah.
I mean, let's hope so. So your solo game that you ran Genesys in, was it fantasy, sci-fi? What kind of?
Yeah, so fantasy. I've been going with a fantasy theme for season 2. One was started out. Season 1 was kind of started out as fantasy, and then moved to sci-fi sort of, and I meandered strangely. I'm trying to stick with fantasy this time, and I want to do a sci-fi season later. But it's fantasy, but it's kind of sort of a desert fantasy kind of setting.
Oh, cool.
So
did you find? Oh, not Dune. Is it supposed to be kind of Dune-ish, or is it more
influenced by, for sure?
Influenced by Dune.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. What isn't influenced by Dune?
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you find that Genesys translates pretty well for the fantasy needs? I mean, obviously the mechanics and everything seem to be pretty generic. Doesn't have to be force powers and blah blah blah. But did you find comparing it to when you were running these other systems through it? Did you find anything that Genesys put forward in terms of kind of how you were creating as opposed to another system? Was there anything you felt like, you know, the Genesys flavor sort of brought out?
So for solo, for me, I really, really liked Genesys for that, actually. I'll probably do more solo with Genesys in the future, like off probably, at least off the air, if not on. But yeah, it's nice because I didn't use an oracle, for example. So I just I always rolled 2 of the attribute dice versus a certain number of difficulty dice, and that was just the oracle. Like you've already got dice that kind of do narrative stuff, so here we go. So that gives me answers that are sort of the yes and yes but, no and no but.
Oh,
sort
that's
of thing.
interesting.
So and honestly, what was really nice is that I ended up having to use that, or it seemed like I had to use that less, because once you sort of get rolling, the dice continually push the narrative in that direction. So it's because it's already kind of got that narrative bent, it already starts to push things in that direction. Just doing one action starts to cause a whole bunch of other drama to unfold. So as opposed to just doing this one thing. 'Cause again, that's cinematically, if you're in a lightsaber fight, or you're in a firefight with somebody, there's always more than just that one thing happening. There's always stuff going on in the background and things shifting around. So it's good for that Mandalorian, the game sort of idea.
Oh yeah, for sure. Did you find that you have created some kind of? It seems like you maybe, for the solo purposes, right, extending what some of like a setback or advantage or whatever could mean in terms of further in the game. So if you're playing with a bunch of people, you might just have the setback be a small thing, but since you're playing by yourself, it can reflect some of the larger world. Have you ever thought about putting together, like, here are my Genesys like solo variant stuff for kind of using it, or have you put together your thoughts on and how you've set this up for?
I haven't really,
use?
just because I haven't done enough of that yet. But that's I hadn't thought of that, but that's an interesting idea.
I'll take 5%.
That's right. I wouldn't be surprised if Parts Per Million doesn't have one. I know that he's got one for every single system I've ever heard of, it seems. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice because it doesn't feel like a different system when you're doing that, because you're already used to it. Once you're used to interpreting the dice, you're already there.
Yeah, I mean, and I've enjoyed Mythic, but if I could have it all combined into one system and not have to get another book, get another table, whatever, like, I would. And it seems like one advantage of having these different dice for different things, it gives you more. Like, I could even see a situation in which you don't even, imagine. And again, I don't know if this would actually work or not. Imagine you had some kind of a montage-y kind of thing. Like, okay, I'm going to, or like a hex crawl kind of thing. I'm going to go from Mos Eisley to Mos Espa. And so I know what my navigation, travel skills, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there's a storm and there are Tusken Raiders and blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to roll all these dice. And instead of canceling them out, I could do it like a dice drop. I could look at them and say what order they come in terms of successes, whatever. Like, it gives you a lot of flavor that I would have to roll a lot of dice, to do. I mean, even though I'm rolling maybe 8 dice, if I was going to do this in sort of my normal, maybe hex crawl table system, I might have to roll 10 different D6s to come up, or whatever, to come up with all those iterations. Whereas, boom, I get a whole kind of menagerie of different things. Okay, I got this advantage. Oh, I got this setback. Oh, and I'm thinking, if I'm playing kind of solo mode, like, okay, well, what does that mean? That I got something good happen, then something bad happened, then I got this far across, whatever. Oh, Brasmus says they're funky, Todd. Funky, yes, funky dice, exactly. And it seems like, particularly in solo play, you have a lot more. You're free to do a lot of that stuff that at a table, I would, either I wouldn't want to, or it would just be, because you wouldn't want to just railroad kind of narrate a whole bunch of stuff off just some dice. But for solo play, it seems like it might be a fascinating way to really kind of kick off kind of a whole narrative block, if you will.
Yeah, and I actually didn't think about that. That's a cool way with the drop to use it. I do think, though, that it's actually less of a danger of railroading to interpret when in normal play, to interpret those results. As long as, because actually one of the things is that you can't predict when those things are going to come up. So it's harder to, in my opinion, it's harder to railroad people into what's going on, because the George Clinton dice, because they're going to surprise. The results are just going to be more surprising. That you won't really be able to predict it as well, and so you can respond to it. And I think it's, at least the way I've always heard it presented, it's totally okay for somebody else, not just the GM, but somebody else to suggest, like, oh, well, maybe this thing happens. And so somebody mentioned before, there is an actual play that plays it. Before they did their custom setting, they played Edge of the Empire, and that's kind of a thing that happens a lot. Now, the people playing it are people who do improv, so there's, that's already their kind of skill and in their wheelhouse. But one of the things that we didn't touch on before, that most of the dice cancel out, most of the results cancel out to be a net advantage, disadvantage, success, failure, except one, which is the triumph and the failure. And those are like, they are like a success. They count as a success and an advantage, or a failure and a threat. but they don't cancel out. So even if you succeed, but you roll a despair for some reason, and despairs only pop up on the upgraded dice, and the triumphs only pop up on the upgraded dice. So you know when that could happen. But so even if you succeed and you roll the despair, you need to resolve the despair. So you specifically succeed, but something bad does happen, and then that those are non-optional. And so that would be like if you were maybe playing a fantasy game, maybe you have you could maybe have a random encounter, or that's when you have sort of you rolled a 1 critical failure that like something not great just happened here.
I got you. And if you're doing something, because I think that One Ring has something like that. If it's not out, I don't know if they call it despair or they call it something else, but basically that. I mean, it's pretty much despair. It's that that concept of the sort of I don't know if they say the will of Sauron or something, but just basically how things move towards corruption. In that game, Terrence says that that live play, they're good at improv but terrible at remembering the dice mechanics.
Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely one of those things. I feel like it's going to be the more you can play it, I imagine, will helpful. I think the first time you get into it, you're going to have to accept that you're going to get a lot of stuff, wrong. Though the fact is once you get the symbols figured out, and then you know which ones kind of cancel out and which ones don't, that must help out.
And if you like dice rollers, they tend to cancel them out for you. So there's free dice rollers. That you say what the pool is for whatever thing you're doing, and you just roll, and it'll show all the dice, but it'll also just show you the net result. So nice. I just like physical dice too much.
No, physical dice are great, and I love like board games. I like board games, and board games I love when they have custom dice. But the nice thing about D20 is that almost anybody, certainly anybody in the role playing game hobby, but a lot of people are going to have D20. So you end up at somebody's house, got a D20. But if you're like, I need that 8-sided special Star Wars die, it's like you better have bought a bunch of those with you. Otherwise, everyone's going to have to, even if you're playing in person, everyone's going to have to get on their phones or get whatever to the dice roller.
And you really do need at least 2 sets. Unfortunately, that is one thing, is I wish they would give you the 2 sets. Because anything more than, they give you 3 of the attribute dice and 3 of the difficulty dice. And those are the ones you typically need more like 5 at an extreme, but it happens. So I do think you need 2 sets.
Yeah. Okay. Brian Smith says, any kind of skill challenge or anything that is resolved over a couple of rolls or manipulating them after they're rolled. Does that concept exist in Genesys?
Maybe we could rephrase it.
Well, like if you mean, let's say, so I'm assuming you mean skill challenges like in 4th. I don't know if you ever played. You only played 5th edition like one time, right? So you
I actually run a 5e campaign, so I have played 5e, but not 4th.
Not 4th, yeah. So a lot of people have ported over from 4th to 5th, but skill challenges were essentially a thing where you might say you're exiting a dungeon, and this is the one that Matt Colville used, and I find it works for people. Okay, the dungeon, you've complete the big bad, but now the castle's crumbling around you. You're trying to escape, and so everyone would say what they do to try to, if you might say to yourself, you might say to them, okay, you're going to need to make 5 successes and have less than 3 failures, and that equates you get out. If something else, so then someone will say, okay, well, at the next junction, I remember what we did or whatever, so I'm gonna turn left, or I'm gonna use some of the crumbling things. We're on like the 3rd sub level, so I'm gonna the ceiling's gonna open up, and I'm gonna use my climbing to climb up the rubble and help people get up into the next level to get us closer, right? And the next person might go, and I'm gonna use my geology skill to figure out which of the walls or the firmest has the best that aren't gonna crumble, so we can use that. So everyone's kind of doing these things and then rolling D20s and succeeding on a skill check. And then once they've amassed X amount of successes, they succeed. And you narrate whatever. And then if they failed, then you would narrate whatever the other side of that was. But that essentially is a skill check. So it's a way of really kind of running a sort of a kind of a narrative experience. Could be kind of montagey also, that kind of way of running sort of multiple things kind of back to back to form a small kind of narrative moment. If that makes sense.
So that does exist, actually. So there's some rules in at least Genesys, probably Edge of the Empire as well, but there's definitely rules in Genesys for sort of dramatic challenges like that. It kind of reminds me, I think, or maybe that's what Savage Worlds calls it, but they both have that kind of a concept of, that exact sort of a thing. So it could be like, especially social situations that could come up, but escaping a dungeon. So you'd say, okay, you need to end up having this number of successes to get out. And what's cool about that in Genesys, you know, is that you're not going to have, again, just have the pass fail. You could always somebody escaping, like, yeah, you all get out, but somebody rolled a despair in there. So eventually, after doing all of this extended sort of chase scene or dramatic event, somebody gets out, but maybe you left something critical behind.
Oh, I like that.
So yeah, that does exist. There are rules for that, and it's in like other generic games like Savage Worlds. I would say this is probably closest to that than anything else. It's very modular, and so there's, you know, as much of the bits in there as you want, but it's really easy to say, like, oh, I don't like this part. That's fine. Like, you know, like weapon tags would be one of them. Weapons can get or items can have a bunch of tags on them, but you're not going to break the game if you just decide that that's too fiddly for you, and just check it, right?
Gotcha.
So yeah, it's not gonna break the math or break the game. It just adds extra depth, and so you can take as much as you want, and then leave everything else.
That despair bit sounds really cool. I would like another little thing I could throw on the end of it. I'll have to see if there's something about that, because I like it in that way, especially if you're playing. I mean, kind of like you were saying, like, hey, you get out, but then something's lost. Or I'm a big fan of that kind of higher fantasy kind of thing of getting corruption or getting or like dark side points or things like that, and having that just a extra little axis of that you can throw on the end, or that just is there, seems really, really cool. Let's see, what does Terrence say?
I will say that we can try to get this with D20s. I believe that one of the main designers for Genesys also made the 2D20 system that Modiphius uses. And that is explicitly an attempt to try to get something similar, but with regular dice.
I have not done the 2D20. I have not. I don't even know if I own any. I mean, I've heard of it. Maybe I'll get somebody on here. I know that theoretically, Carl, who's also on the Audio Dungeon, is going to come in and talk about Savage Worlds next week. So I'll have my second one of these. And depending on how this turns out, I might have you come back to do a Genesys Redux. It seems really cool. I would love to have somebody who can do the Modiphius thing. It's one of those things that seems like a popular system, and they've gotten licenses to stuff, but I don't ever hear of people playing it. And not that I have my ear to like everyone's gaming. It's just one of those things like, oh, wow, they got like Conan, they got all this stuff, and it seems really cool. Yeah. But then I don't hear about anybody saying like, looking for game Modiphius 2D20 or whatever. Like it's kind of a weird, I don't know. Like it kind of reminds me a little bit about like Rifts and stuff. Where like I knew people played Rifts back in the day, but I could never have told you. I bought Rifts books, but I never actually played Rifts. And when I hear somebody who played Rifts, I'm like, wow, you actually played Rifts, like. You know?
Yeah, I think it's pretty new too. So like I actually play actually later tonight, but on Mondays I play in a Star Trek Adventures game, and that's one of the ones that uses that. The short version is, you know, I think it tries to get similar goals. I just think that there's some things Genesys succeeds on more, really, because the short version of that one is that's a dice pool game as well, where you roll between 2 and usually 5 d6s 2 and 5 d20s when you're trying to succeed on something. But it gives you the same axes where you can sometimes, if you roll a 20, it's roll under. So if you roll a 20, that's a complication. Even if you succeed, you still have the complication. And so that's kind of like the despair. The problem is it's in that range can get bigger or smaller depending on the situation. So maybe a complication range is 3. So now anytime you roll a 17, 18, or an 18, 19, or 20 rather, that's a complication. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't seem to happen as much. And what it does lose is it loses from Genesys for me the advantages and disadvantage flavors. So something that you have a disadvantage now caused a setback. You kind of lose that. I think it's quicker, but there's less depth.
Yeah, I mean, it's always that kind of decision we have to make, right? Because the more nuance and depth we get tends to slow things down and make things more complicated. So try to find that sweet spot for what we're trying to do. Before we get here, I am curious. So going to your solo excursions, are you playing something you totally homebrew? Do you play a module? Like, what do you play?
Yeah, so I'm just making up as I go.
Okay.
So the beginning of this season, I play in sort of a kind of a homebrew setting, but haven't worked it out because I want to discover it as much as possible. So the facts I think that I started out at the beginning is that it's just really my character is kind of a barbarian sort of type. It's in the 1,000-year night of desert, so it's perpetually night. Or sorry, the 100 years night or something like I can't remember off the top of my head now. But it's been night, essentially nighttime for it's going to be at nighttime for at least a century. And there's more that goes on there, but you're sort of in this nomadic. I was like, my character is going to be nomadic, and his people are sort of like desert Viking kind of types, and they're trying to get back. Right now, they kind of just go through the desert looking for gold and glory, but their long game is they want to be able to get back their sort of like their temple that was taken from them savagely years ago. But so I'm specifically going for, it is fantasy, it does have magic, but I'm specifically trying to push magic to be more intangible, and so I try to have other people around do like more ritual casting or things like that if there's magic, and it needs to be more nebulous, so it's not quite the normal high fantasy. Even when I started with 5e, I'm trying to eschew a little bit of the normal like high magic fantasy, and more magic is mysterious and weird, and people don't really understand it, and its effects are not obvious. So I try to avoid the like fireball and magic missile stuff. Not that I don't like that stuff. I love that stuff. I wanted weirder. Like,
yeah, I feel like a lot of people, especially as you move from kind of 5 into the OSR space, want to kind of bring back the kind of weirdness and sort of otherworldliness of magic. Terrence has referenced Last Unicorn type magic. And it's a lot easier when nobody in your game, and obviously you're playing by yourself, is a magic user. Because if someone's a magic user, then how do you sell them? Like, well, you're not sure, it's nebulous or all stuff. It's like, no, they kind of need to know. I mean, they don't need to know exactly, but you kind of need to hash out those details. But if it's always just NPCs throwing out magic, then it can be as kind of, because you don't have to explain everything, because the NPC's not going to explain everything, so you can just let it. I feel like that's the same thing that comes up with kind of the demi-humans, is that, I like to play a lot of human campaigns, and part of that is that I like to try to do weird and different things with the if I'm going to have elf types or dwarf types or whatever in the game. But part of that is because I don't have to, if I have a player playing it, then they need to know a lot. But if they don't, then I can keep them mysterious. So if everyone's humans, then all the other creatures can be as weird as I want to. But as soon as you have someone who's like, no, but I am an elf, so I need to know what's going on, or then it's like, well, that's maybe not so weird. Not so weird.
Once you let that cat out of the bag, and you kind of have an explanation for it.
Yeah, especially if you want to make them kind of less and less kind of recognizably human. I mean, maybe if you're an amazing improv actor, you can figure out how to do it. But generally, that if a player, or even really to an extent, you kind of can play off it as a GM by just doing things that don't necessarily make sense, because the idea is that, well, they make sense to them, but just on our limited point of view, it seems like they're just being crazy. When behind the scenes, they're like, no, it's really just being crazy, but I'm just passing that off. But when a player gets a hold of them, it's going to tend to make more sense.
Well, and I think you can skirt it a little bit too. I forget this is slightly off of what their original purpose was, but I think I forget, somebody was saying, I think it was originally they were saying how to skirt like OSR restrictions on like, hey, I really want to play, like, especially if you're playing something BX based like OSE, I really want to play an elf, but I didn't meet the requirements, or I really want to be a cleric, but I also am set on being a dwarf or something like that. And they were saying, like, why not just have like, yeah, you're a cleric because you're a dwarf, but you were raised by humans, and so your entire culture is not dwarf. So my way of skirting that would be to do something similar, like, okay, yeah, if you're set on being an elf, elves are really weird in this setting, so maybe like part of your background is that like you're a foundling or something like that. You've not had contact with elves, and so over time, not only will we discover like you still get to be an elf and have some of the differences, but you don't fully understand what it means to be an elf, and we'll all learn what that means over time. And you were raised maybe in a different scenario, and so that then you can still discover it. You can still kind of like, if somebody will go for that, that's maybe a way to leave the mystery.
That's a cool idea. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you too much past the hour, James. Thanks so much. Sorry so much we had so many issues, but it seems like it resolved itself. We only lost half the stream for that, but
we just rolled
that
too
is
many
okay.
despairs.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like when we did get out there, and hopefully the stuff that was echoey wasn't too bad, people at least can handle, because I thought we had some really good stuff. I really appreciate you coming on and talking Genesys. It definitely makes me want to give it a try, or at least look it up. I really dig some of the ideas that came out in it, and there's so many RPGs out there, we don't get a chance to try all of them, so being able to talk to someone and pick their brain over one that they've played and they like that hasn't made it to our table is always fun. Hopefully we can do it again about something else, and like I said, maybe we'll have you come back after your newborn's got some time and you guys' schedules have gotten back to somewhat of a normalcy. But you got 2 other kids, right? So
I do a 4-year-old and 2-year-old, and I'm
Whew.
outnumbered now.
And they've got the advantage. They
Yeah,
have got
exactly.
the advantage. The advantage die is in their hands now.
Yes.
But I appreciate it. Please, folks, check out his stuff. All the links are in the show description. James, have a great rest of your day, and congratulations in advance. And I'm sure I will see you on the audio dungeon. But everybody else, again, sorry for the echoey stuff. Glad it got fixed, and I'll talk to you.